Welcome to the next Renaissance with Ramayan and Samir. We're in the midst of a massive transformation on the planet. We're witnessing market capitalism testing the limits of Earth's resources, the dangers of climate change, and the unraveling of political and social institutions that gave us stability. These all pose existential risks to our civilization that we cannot ignore. At the same time, we're witnessing a flourishing in consciousness, a revival of the arts as a vehicle for awakening, the emergence of technological breakthroughs that have the potential to transform our economy, and the dawning of new systems experiments. Are we in the midst of the next Renaissance? Come discover on this podcast. Welcome, friends and family, to another episode of the next Renaissance. And today I am so overjoyed to have two of my dear Dharma brothers, two of my best friends in the world, two people that I look up to and admire and respect, to my left and right on this podcast. And that is Kevin Orosz and Luke Kohen. And welcome, guys. Really great to have you both here.
Honor to be here, bro.
Good to be here.
So I'm going to do a little intro for those who don't know these two legends. Some of you may, and if you don't, here is a little bit about them. So Kevin is a coach, entrepreneur, performance philosopher, and student of humanities myths. He is driven by offerings, his voice and presence to improve the lives of people all over the world, and has led retreats and spoken at masterminds internationally teaching the art of polarity. Through his book, Sex, Masculinity, and God, The Trialogues, online courses, evolutionary men's work, and private mentorship, Kevin teaches others how to create more impact in success, ignite polarity in relationships, and claim their kingdom. Welcome, Kevin. Quite a bio.
Great to be here,
Excited to dive into some of that today. And Luke Kohen is a systems change agent, bard, mentor, and emerging artist at the intersection of Web3, eco-villages, social impact entrepreneurship, and conservation. Luke has been guiding leaders, founders, and change agents in deep transformational work for over 15 years. With a mission to support a new cultural narrative on the planet, he shares his music, healing work, consulting with Game B projects, and building a diverse community around the world. Welcome, Luke Kohen.
Grateful to be here. Let's go.
What is a Game B project? Let's start there.
Game B projects are bringing forward a new culture in the workplace. They're implementing new systems.
So what is Game A and Game B?
Yeah.
Maybe give people a little...
Sure. So Game A, let's say Game A is the corporate world, right? So Game A has strict rigidity. They have their gifts too, just like being on time. You know all this backing. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of support. There's a lot of systems that have worked for a while, right? So Game A is, let's say, corporate America. Game B is bringing new culture. So there's more intimacy in the workplace. Maybe there's new systems of governance, not a top-down model. Maybe it's more circular or whole-centric. So you have a council as opposed to a CEO, pyramidal structure. It's more of a circular structure. That's an example of Game A to Game B.
Yeah. Okay. A direct way to define it would be, Game A is a zero-sum system in game theory, which means that it's winner-take-all. So it tends to incentivize extractive capitalistic practices where you can just take as much as you can, cutthroat, betray, or at least colonize, and that's incentivized in corporate structure. Whereas Game B is a positive-sum game, which means that instead of just cutting out the pie and taking it, you actually make the pie bigger. Mm-hmm. So it's not zero-sum. Multiple people can win. Hierarchies and Pareto's, distribution will still happen. There'll still be winners, but there won't be losers per se. Yep. So this is why Game B is actually where the global civilization needs to head, actually.
Mm-hmm. So, we're in Bali right now. And it's interesting being here with both of you as cultural leaders, because my understanding, being in Bali, a lot of the indigenous civilization here has been Game B for a long time, meaning they're very community oriented. Yeah. I don't see beggars on the street here, ever. There's a community fabric that really is woven to take care of everybody. And yet, at the same time, this place is being colonized and corporatized by Game A. And I'm seeing this island shift from Game B to Game A when we're trying to shift from Game A to Game B.
Right.
I don't know if there's much else to say about that, except for it's been stark being here and kind of witnessing almost a reverse trend. And how do we prevent the tide of that happening all over this planet? Like this new paradigm, desire that we have to be able to switch to Game B, but Game A seems so powerful and so strong.
Game A has thousands of years of momentum behind it. As Philip K. Dick said, the empire never died. The empire has been there for a
Created
while
itself.
and has just built up momentum. And it's only because people are opting into it. The consciousness around Game A is strong and systemic. The incentive structure is, plant your boot and climb the hierarchy, and it's zero sum. So it actually incentivizes more psychopathic and sociopathic personality structures. And because of the fiat monetary system, they're able to have, very strong
Leverage.
at scale leverage globally. Game B, why it's existed in Indonesia, but specifically in Bali, is because of the Banjar system.
Speak to
The
that.
villages. There's actually the myth of this enlightened master who basically came up with the Banjar system. And he's like, the only way we're going to be able to repel the colonizers that will come, it's like 1,000 years ago or more, is we have to have villages that take care of each other. So the reason you don't see beggars on the street is because someone will give them rice and a bed in a village. And the Banjars have their own sovereignty, they have their own banking system, they have their own governance, and they have a collective system of villages that are each producing their own crop or resource, trading with one another, and then the families own that property, land, etc., and then pass it down. And so there's a strong village community, which is what has characterized the third world, and is also why the third world is experiencing a massive boom right now, as the first world is actually below replacement at population, and is incentivized to come places like this and like kind of eat up real estate and business, because New York and Silicon Valley is not where it's happening anymore. So the power is actually shifting.
Yeah, I can see that one of the things that they did well in Bali was really make it difficult for people to buy a property here. But people are still leasing property like crazy and overdeveloping it.
There's a massive land grab globally right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because of these systems are starting to break down. It's obvious. It's more and more obvious, at least through what my girlfriend calls the panini, the pandemic. We call it the panini to give it less power.
So, a question, Luke. While we're on the topic of Bali, because I think it's really important that we're all here physically,
Yeah, that's
and
right.
that this place is holding some really powerful codes for the next Renaissance. I've been really moved here by the beauty of the local culture, by the generosity of the spirits and the hearts, by this Banjar system that takes care of everybody, and yet, I would say it's being threatened on some level by the forces. Yet at the same time, Luke, there's such powerful culture, ceremony, and ritual that are holding the culture intact, that seem to have such a strong force field around it that is protecting it. So maybe you can speak to that and the importance of that, because I know you're deep in this work.
Yeah. Well, I think the other piece of what Kevin was speaking to and how it ties into it is culture, right? Like, why is Game A so strong? It's the momentum, the leverage, and why do places like this have such a profound magnetism? Why are so many people from around the world? It's the prayer field. It's literally the system of altars and the relationship with spirit world. All indigenous cultures recognize that there's other worlds that parallel this one. They're intersecting, and so being able to give credit to and acknowledge the role that the invisible world or the spirit world or the quantum universe actually has in its influence on reality itself is a significant part of this culture. And I would say in terms of that you have the Banjar system, you also have systems of communitas and ecstasis, where groups are going into trance together and they're in ceremony together, and that creates a level of bonding that bridges that invisible world and physical world in community. So if we are in ceremony together, if we're experiencing continuously, say as a village, whether it's here, Costa Rica, Portugal, doesn't matter where you are, if you're in community and you're experiencing trance states together and you're experiencing a unified field of connection, you're going to have stronger bonds and the ability to sense make reality at a higher level, because you've gone through these experiences of being in that kind of pulse and that kind of energy.
Very
and
true.
so I think that this is part of what is lends to the magic of Bali, is this deeply woven fabric of magic and of the invisible world and of the prayer field and the ceremonies that are here, that whether people are aware of it or not, draws them here. And in terms of like prophecy and in terms of how instrumental this is, the ancient Vedic seers acknowledge this island a very long time ago as like a navel of creation. That there's like portals here that influence the rest of the civilization. So we're seeing that the amplification of colonialism in a softer form. It's still colonialism, it's soft colonialism, ramping up in a space where a culture is still
Intact.
actually intact, but simultaneously to to this speeding up of colonial infrastructure and of game A hyper capitalism or late stage capitalism simultaneously. So there's this like interesting friction that's building that you're speaking into. It's quite strong right now.
Well, I think my hope is that because so much of it's leasehold, Balinese can be like, great, we made a bunch of money, get out. About a week ago, or a little bit more than that, we were at a gathering you put together for your benevolent cultural collective, which we'll go into in a little bit. And there's this beautiful man named Paradox, which you invited, led us into this one of these types of ceremonies. What was it called? Kachek. And I had a profound experience. I think everybody who was there had a profound experience. For those who don't know what Kachek is, it is a way that the community comes in this trance state, ecstatic prayer-formance grid that you were speaking of, where we all came into circle. We all came into a specific geometric configuration where every single person in the circle could see each other. And he created a programmed prayer-formance trance state that everybody could lock into and play into with sound, with rhythm, with connection in the body. And by the end of it, everybody was woven with each other in a completely different way that you can never do verbally. That is really, really powerful and something I think most of the world has lost. I know a lot of indigenous cultures have it. And what role do things like this play in the next Renaissance? How do we revive these practices in our emergent culture?
Yeah. I mean, Jamie Wheels spoke a lot to this in his new book, and this is kind of the ancient formula for healing, for gathering knowledge, and creating collective coherence in a village. And it goes through ecstasis, catharsis, and communitas, which are just Greek words. Ecstasis just means to go beyond the self. This isn't the party drug ecstasy. Ecstasy just literally means in the Greek
Exalted state.
To go beyond self, which is extremely healing. And that's where the catharsis comes in, which is what Kachak is designed to do. Like you said, it's traditionally used for exorcism, to remove bad energy, bad medicine, to help a birth, to help a celebration. And catharsis is the state where we go beyond ourselves and actually can heal. You can cry, you can laugh. That deep presence in being witnessed by the village is the most healing thing. And then we enter communitas. So you can have a bunch of people like a committee in Game A, and they have shared goals and alignment, and they only go so deep because everyone is kind of not sure about everyone else. There's only coherence in the boardroom. It doesn't extend beyond. Communitas is when the hearts are actually linked, and because the sense of self through ecstasis has been diminished, you enter into communion. Yeah. And this is what religion has always been based on. This is what mysticism and shamanism have always been based on. And it's what the West has lost touch with, which is what we're seeing now with the psychedelic renaissance and psychedelic therapeutic techniques actually entering the mainstream. But it's also the most powerful, the most ancient version is the drum or the beat, which is what Kachak uses. Kachak syncopates through the sound, the rhythm, the into an entrainment of the nervous system, which facilitates the healing.
And it's using that, and everybody's doing that together,
See deep, go deep.
See deep, go deep, and everybody then goes,
check.
And we're entering these rhythmic, because the Sanskrit, the root of the word rhythm is the Sanskrit word ritam, which means the laws of nature, right? And so the rhythm is the enactment of the laws of nature. It is there. Deva, Devi, enactment, Shiva, Nataraj, the great drum player. It's all embodied in that rhythmic interconnection. And that's why, we talk about music, but music is so beyond just what we know in the West as music, which is so much performance-based. It's so much self-based. But here, the music is not self-based. The music
community-based.
Is community-based.
Yeah, that's a really profound point.
That's really, isn't it?
Which is the ancient way.
And it's cool, like Paradox is talking about. So Paradox was initiated in 1991 by an elder in that form, and never thought that he would be doing that, at all. It's not something he asked for, or something that he was seen in, acknowledged, and given the mantle of, and initiated into holding, right? Then had an experience of sharing at Burning Man one year, and it was like, okay, this wants to be shared with the world, and his Balinese teacher was very proud that he could carry it in a good way and empowered him. And this is worth naming in this time where there is appropriation, where there is the taking of the ancient and repurposing for personal gain. we can touch in on this because
I think we should at
it's
some
a really big part of the Renaissance is
I'll tag it.
the proper implementation of ritual with permission, with understanding, with rites of passage, with having right relations with the culture that it's being implemented from, right? For example. So I just wanted to acknowledge him, that he's someone that I saw was bringing this deeply permissioned initiatic process into community as a white man that was honored and given that permission from, like, at a time where that wasn't happening in like the 90s. And so when he talks about the community element of the music here, like the what's the
Gamelan.
Yeah, the gamelan. It's kind of like MCs or like hip hop dancers kind of battling, like, we do it this way, like how coherent are we, how synced are we, and like that's our way of battling, is like, how much can the we be represented in that village to like exemplify the rhythm and the cadence and the tightness and the flavor, the unique flavor that they do it, and kind of battle rapping in that way as a cultural like it's the music is about the we and like how synced they can be as a collective process, which is so dope.
It really is, and I found this in indigenous cultures around the world. In Zimbabwe, the polyrhythms that they get into, the xylophone, the mbira, and how they're playing in polyrhythms, and how the whole village will be dancing and in circle all night with the spirits, mediums in circle, and they just have energy, and the drummers are going all night. It's a collective process. It is the music, the sound, the prayer, which brings this connection in this tapestry of the village. And I just think it's an interesting point, because as we're talking about this next Renaissance, there's so many factors in the next Renaissance. We're talking about the systems change. We're talking about the architecture. But so much of systems change is led by the art, the cultural, the bard. And yet, our understanding of it in the West is hyper-individuated. It is performative. And there's three roles of performance. And we write this. Imagine there's a concentric ring on the outside, and then there's a concentric ring in the inside, and then there's a dot, right? And it's like in Islam, they call this the hakika and the tarika, right? Where like the outer ring is performance, the inner ring is initiation, is shamanism. And the center point is ecstasis, is divine realization. It is beyond mind. So the performance is there to be able to create an experience to take you beyond. The shamanic journey is actually what takes you beyond. And the center point, or the fire, is the transformative experience of being in the beyond. Everybody's actually looking for that. Whenever we go to a music festival, I mean, we've been to so many music festivals. What are we really looking for? We're looking for that ecstasis.
Those three states.
We really are. But we have so much more depth to go to be able to create that as a culture rather than as a paid experience. And I kind of want to just unpack this for a second, because we only seem to be able to access these experiences for like $700, or how much you can pay your pseudo ayahuasca shaman who doesn't really have that much training. Where do we get to bring this into more coherent models for us to be able to have as the basis of tapestries of culture?
It's not a value system yet. And this is where we're talking about culture as a shifting culture. The new Renaissance is holding the frequency of a set of values that are culturally based. So we don't have a shared culture right now that values these at the highest level, where the whole society and civilization is built around self-realization. Like, for example, in ancient Egypt, or in ancient Maya, there's the societies supporting communitas, ecstasis, catharsis. Like, the whole setup is supporting that. So we have to actually create some agreement fields and understandings that, like, what are we actually valuing? Because it seems like in Game A, in the way societies, we're valuing status, position, accumulation. There's even ideals of what we quote unquote value, but then there's the actions that actually are extractive based, or so I see a mass discrepancy even in the sort of awakened communities where there's a set of value systems, but they're not actually being lived into or embodied at the level that's creating that cultural shift, because there's a disconnection between the values and the culture and the actual lived action as a culture to bring about what you're talking about. So we don't have those values in place right now. So it's an interesting question because we receive so much value from it, but then we just go back to, like
Game A.
back to work,
Yeah.
or back to
Totally.
quote unquote reality, which is,
Well, it's because the incentive models have prioritized that.
Yeah.
And everything, the commodification of shamanism and psychedelics, and like the white guy in your apartment in LA serving you ayahuasca, or the music festival culture, is the fumbling of the capitalistic sleepwalk towards this model. And like if we look at what Renaissance actually means, right? So Renaissance means rebirth in French. In the Middle Ages, a period of book burning and the Inquisition and burning women for just being women, and the craziness of the recidivism that dominated medieval culture. And then what happened? They lost the why, they lost the plot. And so to come back to it, what they did was they looked back at the last golden age in that culture, which was Hellenic culture in Greece and Rome. And that's what sparked off the Renaissance, right? A change in perspective with art, the change in using Latin, as you've described many times, to be a very specific empirical language to advance sciences and art. And this is what, gave birth to humanism and the Renaissance art explosion and patronage and systems of banking and systems of leaving indentured servitude and serfdom. And actually the merchant class arose and the artisans. Now we're in a similar situation. And as Terence McKenna often talks about, it's an archaic revival. The future is ancient. We have to go back even further. And his argument is that we have to go back now to the Paleolithic. It won't be enough to go back to Greece and Rome. We have to look farther back because we've lost the plot so far that mental institutions are full of people that just need trance, rhythm, healing, catharsis, the village. They don't need more
the
pharmaceuticals.
people setting the norms actually need the most healing.
Right. And the people at the top, it's winner take all and it's extraction based. So it's like basically like selling out your future children and future generations for profit today. And they're legally bound to do that for shareholders. So the new Renaissance, or the next Renaissance, the mythos of this podcast, is going to be about how do we like collectively vote? And this is where Web3 comes in. This is where a resurgence of art, music, sculpture, dance,
Tribal
trance,
culture.
healing, tribal culture. And we were talking about this the other night. In our communities, there's such a reverence, and like, a lot of it is innocent and ignorant, of trying to honor indigenous culture, because we've received so much from the Yawanawa, from the Wiyadika, from, these tribes, that the culture is just importing at a rapid rate. It's full of abuse. It's full of commodification, appropriation. But the unconscious impulse is there to re-navigate and revalue set the why and the mythology of the culture, which is why the culture is at a tipping point now. And coronavirus has accelerated it, actually, I think, in our favor, because it's collectively red-pilled a lot of people that were kind of okay with business as usual. And the last 2 years have shown us that that is absolutely not an option.
It's not an option.
Well-
Can I go off one piece that you just
Sure,
shared
go for it.
that feels powerful? What you were speaking into, the why there's such a deep desire, and like how it's naturally emerging that so many people in these spiritual communities are migrating towards indigenous wisdom. And I think this is a really key piece is the loss of ancestral knowledge and the loss of place. So
And the loss of elders.
the loss of elders and knowing a lineage. So another example, Bali, unbroken lineage. They know, there's a house from the ancestors, where we come from. And we're looking at representatives, the Wiyadika and the Yawanawa are non-colonized indigenous. So they're not carrying the same trauma that some other tribes are carrying because they were never colonized. I mean, it's starting to happen with the Yawanawa now in the Amazon, but the Wiyadika were never colonized. So there's this pre-colonial consciousness that's carrying a continuity unbroken for thousands of years. Now, as third generation Americans or whatever, our ancestral roots are so misplaced that there's been a break in the mythology, or a break in the song lines, in all those things that we would be normally given, our rites of passage and our original songs. We lost that, so we're naturally going to migrate towards where it's still intact. Where is it still intact as a through point? But it's actually, there's a deeper initiation for a lot of people to actually go back into their own lineages and retrace their actual ancestry based on the DNA that you were given in this life to trace that. But I think it's a huge piece to understand the post-colonial consciousness and world that we're living in is the loss of the ancestral wisdom of the European tradition specifically. So we're looking at, we're looking at the last 500 years. We can see the living ancestors, like the Nubian people and the First Nations people and the indigenous people of now have this unbroken lineage they could see, and the disparity of the Roman Empire, for example, going in and trying to genocide the Druids and all the Germanic tribes being wiped out from Europe from that whole campaign of Europe. So the actual colonialization that's happened on this planet goes so much further back than we realize. We think it's just in the last 500 years, but it's ancient. It's actually tied to the original separation and the original colonial inception that happened actually in the European continent. So we're talking about, exponential generations of epigenetic trauma stored up so that we're the most easily conditioned into the modern colonial paradigm, the modern capitalist paradigm, because there's such a loss of connection to the ancestral roots.
What a better catalyzation for a new renaissance, right? I think part of this podcast is looking at the cauldron, so to speak. Like, you have a melting pot always of confluence of factors that have to boil over in order for a transformation to happen, a new movement to happen. And I think, as you identified with the last Renaissance, it was a Black Plague, devastated Europe. There was feudalism. It was the beginning of mercantilism. It was the beginning of the merchant class starting to pop up. It was the beginning of the printing press, dissemination of knowledge all across the planet. So now you had new ways of travel, new ways of art and culture being able to be disseminated. Market capitalism or mercantilism, it wasn't market capitalism yet, giving people an entirely new way to have power outside of just the straight feudal system, which was purely land-based. Mercantilism was the beginning of the democracy of what we now know today as capitalism, right? Which in many ways has a lot of benefits to it and has taken us here in a lot of good ways. We live incredible lives because of it, but it's come at such a great cost. Yeah. And I think we're speaking of these costs, and these costs are mounting and they're adding up. In every corner of the planet, people are feeling them. And they're coming to places like Bali because they, as you said, both of you, because there's this hunger in the soul to connect with that, even whether they're consciously aware of it or not. It's almost like why Hawaii was colonized, or these powerful lands are because there's such a bankruptcy of our own ancestral spiritual depth and connection because of how much the Europeans specifically have colonized, that there's a opportunity now to create a new cultural moment, a powerful cultural moment that has the ability to heal a lot of this and provide a rich tapestry of new culture. And I feel like a big opportunity in this next renaissance. And it ties in with Web3, as you said. It ties in with new systemic models. It ties in with new governance models. All of those things are important, but at the root, if we're not addressing the culture itself, if we're not addressing, like you said, the core value system and the principles that are enacted from that value system, and sometimes I sit back, guys, and I'm just like, this is so big. There's thousands of cultures all over the world, thousands of languages, thousands of people. Is there a possibility of creating a more collective shared tapestry? Is it just our culture that's emerging into a new renaissance? Where do we really see this next renaissance taking root at more of a global level in the context of our global cultural milieu?
Well, this is where the bards are at the front line, the storytellers and the consciousness architects, the philosophers, the mystics. This was the underground in the Renaissance, right? In the Roman era, they literally gathered in the catacombs and did their rites and rituals. And then when they went above ground, they put the cloaks on and they were silent and they just rendered unto Caesar what is Caesar. There's been a bohemian, artistic, and holistic impulse in humanity in all times, in all places. It's been suppressed systemically by the forces of militarism, materialism, and now it's capitalism. But it's generally just the leveraging and the capturing of money, sex, and power, which you can look at as, Muladhara, Svadhisthana, Manipura. It's like the lower chakra system, which isn't lower, like less important. It's more of the base needs and survival-based consciousness. So if you're living in a world, based on fear, you can look at like the average Roman aristocrat. Their servants came to them and were like, there's a man who's risen from the dead and he's gathering the lower classes around him. This was a shock to the Roman aristocrat. This is similar to the Silicon Valley, nihilist atheist who's at a C-suite. Someone telling him, I smoked 5-MeO DMT this weekend and met God, and I'm leaving my position. And there's a non-physical world, and I'm getting a divorce because I realize I've been living a lie. The same revelation that psychedelics are bringing, that trance, the return of indigenous wisdom, the resurgence of things like, these ideals that we see in the purists in the blockchain space around, hey, like full sovereignty of money, land. We're not ruling based on kings and governments. It's like we're actually returning to the human spirit. This is the kind of energy that's going to break up the cultural assumptions and the stories. Materialism being a large part of it. The idea that we're just
Newtonian
these bodies,
science.
when you die, the Newtonian, very rigid, linear base, like the world is just a billiard table. Everything's based on cause and effect. There is no such thing as coincidence or synchronicity. There's no such thing as life after death. It's all can be explained by the brain and neuroscience. They've tried really hard to push that narrative.
To reduction.
Reductionism,
It's
reductionism,
rational
materialism,
deductionism.
rationalism, taken to its extreme, create lonely, isolated humans susceptible to mental illness. And that is that's the real pandemic.
And programming.
Well said.
Yeah, because when you're manipulating those baser levels, you're manipulating survival, sexuality, power, right? Identity, and in many ways, the mass religions were instruments and tools to enact those rigid systems of compliance. And we're seeing a breakdown in Christianity all over the world, people losing faith because the return, and Ra talks about this in Human Design, that this coming of the year 27 of the rising phoenix, this sort of prophecy, if you will, or prediction that the individual, if they're no longer living in alignment with their own inner authority and their highest excitement of what their soul truly came here to do, is that there's going to be an erosion. There's going to be some kind of breakdown, whether it's the body breaks down or the mind or circumstances, something that's trying to move people towards, hey, it's time to do what you really came here to do, and stop giving your power away to so many external authorities. You have an inner authority that is your soul, that is an impulse to move towards something that's actually benefiting the whole, right? And so, this kind of power over this sort of hierarchical structures that we've seen over this last, millennia of time, and the reasons why we can go into like Steiner's work and talk about these invisible forces that have influenced humanity. We could talk about just greed or pre-adaptive warring cultures in Europe, that led to colonialism eventually. Like, you could trace any of it, but I think it's exciting that you're tracking around and what this prompt of like the new Renaissance is what is the evolutionary jump that's allowing systemic change to happen that's rooted in our inner authority, but the sense of we. What is, what do we need to do? Because it's beyond just survival, although survival is an impetus for a lot of people, right? Like, how is the human race going to survive this time? Are we going to upload our consciousness into some
This is why we're here on the podcast, is to bring different thought leaders together to uncover this together, because it's almost too much for any one person to grasp. And you see a lot of thought leaders in the space try to grasp it in one mind, but in reality, it's like the blockchain. It's completely decentralized in a sense, where if this is all one experienced, I remember my teacher once said, if this wasn't all one, we wouldn't be able to see each other. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Differentiation as an expression of the one.
Yeah, exactly. In Chitya Veda Veda Tattva, the Krishna consciousness, it means inconceivably and simultaneously one yet distinct. And so we're in this great tapestry. So my transformation is going to impact you on some level. Sure. The Maharishi effect, the 100 monkey effect, however you want to say it, the entrainment of our collective consciousness is moving. And there's so many forces that are pressing down upon us all the time. The mainstream media, the narratives that are being informed through there, which we all know are incredibly corrupt at this point. I don't think it's a revelation to anybody to speak about.
CNN isn't the truth.
This just in, everybody.
I know, right?
Most of what you're consuming is full of meat.
So, just like the last Renaissance had the printing press, the internet today has changed everything.
Yes.
the advent of social media has changed everything. TikTok, Twitter, the global mass scale capacity to communicate. I feel the next quantum evolution is not just the capacity to communicate, but it's the capacity to sense make together. Truly sense make. And that the next level of government, true decentralized collective government, has a lot to do with how we sense make together and how we adapt these technologies to create true forums where our ideas, attitudes, perspectives, and views can be seen in their true nature and debated with other views in a proper system, in a format where the collective can weigh in and have a proper infrastructure of a sense-making vehicle that's not just like TikTok to your face for 15 seconds, entertainment, swipe next. It's this whole vehicle, this whole TikTok, this whole short-form videos forum.
Forum is the key word that you named in it.
It is. It
the
is the forum.
erosion of public forum.
The agora.
Is
the loss of the commons.
Yeah, is the loss of the commons.
Exactly.
That piece is huge, and you can look at this from a journalistic standpoint too, which for me is I study investigative journalism in university as my second major because of 9/11, because that was like, I want to understand what happened here, what's the truth, and went down a rabbit hole into investigative journalism and how it's being eroded in time. And looking at the last couple of years, we've seen the complete erosion of genuine investigative journalism, which its function in its principality is to create a public forum. And social media in the beginning was like, oh, great, this is going to create a forum and a way for people to interact. And then that also got hijacked, taken out of a space for actual critical debate and having a space for public forum into a very strong tool for conditioning and creating different camps and division and polarization. So
But, I see a way around it. With Daniel Schmachtenberger and Tristan Harris and some of the people in our network, there's a lot of concern saying it's too late. Right? It's too late. Our brainstem has been hijacked. Our limbic stem's been hijacked because of the dopamine that we're getting from likes. But I think that's an entrainment mechanism. If you take that and you're getting the same type of feedback for your views that are being properly debated in a forum, you're still getting that same dopamine hit in response. You're still getting the same feedback mechanism. It's just for a different context. So rather than saying it's all doom and gloom, it's done, we're over, it's how do we adapt that? And let's say Aikido. Right? I feel like we need to become Aikido masters, right? And instead of just being like, oh no, doom and gloom, it's all done, like they fucked humanity, excuse my language. It's like, no, let's like
remix.
Well, this is the thing, like,
exactly.
The empire is serving evolution because they've built systems that have perfectly mapped the brainstem. Their model is how much ad per click revenue can we generate. That's why they're all free. If a service is free, you are the product. Social media has perfected this. Silicon Valley and the technocracy, you got to hand it to them. They've fucking perfected the dopamine casino of likes, views, and status, which is inherent to a human being. Because in a tribal context, if you weren't liked or seen by your peers, you might be exiled. And exile in ancient times meant death.
Survival. Yeah.
Literally meant death. And we see this with the youth now being hijacked on TikTok. You see it being used as a weapon of mass propaganda and weapon of mass distraction, different kind of WMD. Now, what's amazing is they've built the architecture for us.
Yeah, they have.
We merely need to upload positive, benevolent, positive game models and systems into that structure, and it immediately builds the other way. If we can turn likes, shares, views, all that stuff, we do have a huge conversation, which is hard to tackle, around censorship. Zero censorship obviously creates issues because it's just a fucking free-for-all of hate speech and dark shit. What the system now, where any doctor or medical person who spoke out against the panini was silenced, or investigative journalists, if they're not under one of the 6 owner companies owned all media in America, and I think maybe most of the world, that's not a great model. We have to have some kind of way to have attestations and filters around the quality of content and are people receiving value from it. And yet, if we use the same incentive models but just upload positive incentives, we could see things trending like not eating genetically modified foods, trending around philanthropy and indigenous integration and wisdom. And we can see that happen very quickly. I think Tristan and Daniel Schmachtenberger and those guys, because they've consumed so much of the metadata around like the situation we're in. Yeah, we're in a it's the bottom of the ninth and we're down like 6 runs. It's an intense situation.
It's a
It's
hyperlogical reductionist
It is.
worldview that has a lot of merit in logical
It does.
reductionist world, but it's missing the piece of multidimensionality and again that whole invisible world and how much that can actually impact the experience of reality. So if we're not tracking multidimensionality and we're not relating to this multi-paradigm experience through the lens of consciousness, we're going to miss the opportunity to really to co-create with reality at the highest levels. And that's the piece that I think is one of the major factors in entering a renaissance or not, is the evolution of consciousness. And I think all these things have ramped up to try to prevent that. All these things that we're seeing, the dopamine going deeper into the screens, is because there's an inevitable shift in consciousness that wants to happen, where if you cross that mass adoption, you cross that certain level, it's critical mass.
So do you guys think that we're in the beginning of a new renaissance?
I think we already are. I think NFTs is just a single case demonstrates that, where the conversation around art, the rights to art, copyright, music, visual art, AI art now, that conversation being brought to the mainstream, obviously driven by some pump and dump bad actors and some economics, but also just driven by pop culture. This is where Gary Vee is tracking it so well. Why did Pokemon become a worldwide phenomenon? Why did Beanie Babies? Why did Andy Warhol and the famous prints he did?
Totally.
On the surface, it looks like cheap, silly, almost childish art, and yet it's speaking to the inner child in us all. It's speaking to the power of art to change narrative, and is actually resistant to some of the political and religious traps that have suppressed it in other areas. I think Voltaire has one of the greatest quotes for our time. It's like, if you wish to know who rules you, merely ask who you cannot criticize. Art is immune. Art bypasses the defenses and the immune response of the capitalistic reductionist folks, the dominators, and slips in, almost like Bilbo Baggins slipping into Smaug's lair and grabbing, the gem or the ring. The dragon consciousness, which we can call reptilian, which opens rabbit holes, but it's just simply the low brain, which is merely a threat detector. It's hyper-specific, hyper-logical, and quite lethal in the capitalistic, high-leverage game A. Meanwhile, game B folks that, they've done all these studies longitudinally. After 60, it's probably adjusted for inflation now, but after 60,000 US a year, your happiness doesn't go up. Once you have a roof over your head, you have provide for your family. It's not about happiness anymore. It's just about status and ego. And so, as Buckminster Fuller said, to continue name dropping the OGs, since 1952, he did a fucking meta-analysis of all the systems at that time, post-World War II, the Bretton Woods world that was created. We've had the technology, the resources, the supply chain, even back then in the 50s, which is now 70 years ago, to feed, clothe, and provide a basic level of sustenance, not, Silicon Valley penthouse lifestyle to every human being on the planet. Now, we also just crossed 8 billion, so I'm sure we might have to do that meta-analysis again. But that shows you that it's not about the tech. It's not about supply chains. It's about the consciousness, it's about the story.
So I have me and my brother, Zamir, who's also co-host of this podcast. We've talked a lot about the gift and the gift culture, versus commodified capitalistic culture. And Louise Hyde did a beautiful book called The Gift, which I'm sure some of you have read. And I really sit with that. I'm like, what is gift culture in today's time? What does it actually look like to be in the spirit of the gift? In the spirit of the gift, where something gains value the more it's shared. Right? It's about passing something through the system. The term Indian giver came along because you had a gift and you'd keep passing on the gift because the gift accrued value the more hands that it touched. Right? And I think that's a beautiful understanding, rather than this idea of hoarding, where we think that hoarding creates value, but in fact it actually loses value. And so I'm meditating on what parts of the gift principle do we need to enact. One of them, I think, is the concept of demurrage, where if you hoard, the actual value of your money is lost. The more you put it in circulation, the more it gains.
Well, it's like water stagnating. Yeah. It's
like water. It's a great metaphor. Yeah. Secondly, if you look at the roots of capitalism and you look at the roots of modern day banking, a lot of it has to do with land, right? It's always been land. Feudalism, the ownership of land. Colonialism, land. The entire modern banking system is built on mortgages, land, houses, right? It accounts for the majority of bank debt that's issued as mortgages. So if you look at that and you're like, wait a second, one more point is the point that you made around the $60,000. What do people spend most of their money on, 70% of their income on? Rent, landlord, right? There's lords of land. We're still in that kind of model. So wouldn't it make sense that a big part of the next Renaissance came with the gifting of land, with those who had the means providing land gifts without receiving the money back, and providing places that allowed people to live and sustain in type of a new cultural model. So we decommodify land, which means that we return back to some level of stewardship. Now, this is going to require benevolence, but if Warren Buffett can give $40 billion and people can give hundreds of billions of dollars with the giving pledge. You look at people like Mackenzie Scott. She's like, I can't give money away fast enough. Like, I don't even know what charities to give it to. I'm trying to give money away. I don't know how. There's so much capital. I feel like if we can create a movement around the gifting of land and the ability to support those lifting out of poverty through the gifting of land and create an intelligent system, that we will begin to reverse some of the spiral of the intense commodification. And I'm even looking at Bali. What's happening here? Land. Hyper commodification of land, the selling of that, and that it's destroying culture. It's like locusts, coming and ripping apart everything. What do you guys think of that? I'm curious to your take.
I think you nailed it. This was traditionally, if you go deep into the history of law from the crown, like for England, which is the meta colonizer that has influenced everything else, there was always common land, or the commons, that the people owned and the crown couldn't take, and it was purposed for everyone. This is where your taverns and bars were built, which is the medieval Twitter. You just go, you have a pint. Oh, so Worthington, I heard this. And, there's pamphlets, and they're just riffing. That was always where sense making occurred, which is extremely critical to our time, because all of the ways we sense make, because media, by the way, Medea in the Bible was the land of sorcerers. Etymology is the secret history of language. Like, media was never meant to inform or empower. We have to retake that, and the land, like as you're saying, the commons reestablishes that. What are the other major areas? Well, food, water, sovereignty. Like the fact that most of the food is being bought up by the billionaire class right now, like Bill Gates being an example, where it's like, oh, he's buying up all the farmland in the Midwest of America. It's like, why? What's happening there? Well, it's supply chain control, and food is a big one. If we can actually grow, it's like the number of American cities where it's illegal to grow a permaculture or biodynamic-based garden on your land.
It's illegal to collect rainwater. It's illegal to create
that tells
compost toilets.
It's like you can give a nice rap about how these governments care about the citizen, but if you judge by their actions, it's actually the complete reversal. Same thing with air. Same thing with water. Water being one of the most precious ones.
Water being the foundation of life, and how all the current systems, especially in the U.S., are intentionally trying to create scarcity out of this. Water will be the new oil in the dark night of the soul, hard passageway from our current paradigm to the new Renaissance. Will surround water, in my opinion. We will pass through. We will go through a passage around water as a collective.
A lot of people talk about the Aquarian Age and that whole myth,
the water bear
meme. It's very much to do with that.
Well, the
main pieces are like escaping the landlord system. We, in many ways, well, first off, in America, it's a republic similar to Rome, with provinces and governors. It's not a democracy. It's not direct representation. There's an electoral college. People have your best interests and they vote for you. You're not directly voting for anything. So that mythology and illusion, do not pay any attention to the man behind the curtain. It's Wizard of Oz. It's like, wait, there's a guy back here running all this? It's like, no, don't look over here. This is what's happening. It's literally sock puppets, and people are starting to get red pilled and be like, wait, this is bullshit. You're just voting for a management team of the corporation known as America. What commons do, and actually it's one of the most radical things you can do, is it disables that system. Because now it's like, hey, this land is shared, it's steward based. No one's collecting rent here.
That's in trust.
There's still consensus models and coherence that need to be created. It's like, we don't want you to build a shopping mall because this is our papaya farm. Like, what the fuck are you doing? So there still has to be navigation and collective sense making, but you can build your domicile, raise your family, raise food, raise livestock, whatever. And then the gift economy, which Burning Man is a kind of an extreme example, but they demonstrate this. If everyone's gifting, everyone has more than enough. That's the magic. And people can't believe that until they experience it. Because the enactment of that is so rare. You would never walk into a mall and try to gift somebody a Rolex or something. It's like, wait, how much does that cost?
I think this is one of the coolest things that Burning Man introduced to the collective consciousness as it's gone mainstream is this energy of gifting and coming into an experience of like, oh wow, like radical self-reliance, all these foundational principles, and then like there's no money being exchanged.
You know what's one of the most radical things about it?
What's that?
Is that how good does it feel to give?
Yeah.
Feels amazing.
I
There's a helper's high. Neurologically, the helper's high. You get oxytocin when you give.
I forget
And, do you feel that great when you go and buy something? Probably not as much, actually.
It's short term.
It's nice.
It's a quick fix.
The feeling of giving is receiving. And I believe the myth that has been perpetrated through capitalism is that happiness is materialism, happiness is ownership, happiness is hoarding, happiness is having. And it creates this pinched off feeling in the heart.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think the most viral videos online consistently are when somebody gives to somebody in need?
Yeah.
Those always blow up.
That's
Every
right, yeah.
single
It touches something
one.
really deep in the
It
collective
touches something
heart.
inside of us.
Yeah.
How good do we feel when we can give $20 to somebody on the street and we see them and we sit down with them for a moment and they're like, oh my God, you just made my day. Like, it touches something deep inside of us. That happiness comes from giving. And every indigenous tribe knew this. The chief's job was to give, to throw the potlatch, to hold space that took the abundance and giving it back to the tribe.
Yeah.
If you didn't do that, you were insane.
So it's hard for
like
people
you'd be deposed
to...
very quickly. So I think a big part of this gift culture narrative is that we are here to give, that the reputation and status reorientation is around those who give, not the Fortune 500, those who hoard. And we've given so much media, culture, attention, love, status to the hoarders. We've got to figure out how to give it to the givers.
They've been
properly.
idealized. They've been idealized. So
We also own the media.
The
That's
value,
truth.
Yeah, that's true.
the value system as the current model. We know the value system is not in alignment with life. Ultimately, it's not life affirming. It's not life serving. It's actually extractive, right? So, again, it comes back to the value systems and then what the culture is prioritizing. A culture where we're prioritizing giving would have to be enough out of survival to be able to feel empowered to give. So it's kind of a question, how do we get enough people out of survival that gifting becomes a cultural norm of the new Renaissance? It's actually getting a lot of people out of survival. Because if people are in survival, it's hard to give. But even seeing when there was one of those kind of TikTok viral videos around giving, and this guy was going around asking for money, and he was gonna give money to whoever like actually gave. So he asked, someone well off for $20, and he was like, no, get away from me. And like other people were like, no. And then the person that ended up, like he started to like tear up and be like, I need to eat. It was like a homeless person gave him her last $10. The person that had the least amount gave, and then he gave her like, I think like maybe like $500 for giving. She won the secret. But I think what you're talking about is like what is the fundamental goodness of the human spirit?
Yeah.
And how can we nourish that?
Exactly.
And bring that goodness out to participate in a new culture?
Yes.
It's kind of like, Web3 being different, all these things being different. It's actually creating a participatory culture where people aren't just sitting feeling powerless. Like people felt powerless during the pandemic. They were at home figuring out how to shift to online businesses, like going through all this, like, having to sit with themselves or be in the face the codependency of the system or codependency of their household, the codependency of their like all these distortions that are so rampant in our world got put onto blast. So it's like, what is the re-incentivization? Like, what is the actual re-incentivization of a participatory culture that's inviting the best in humanity? I think that's a great prompt.
It is a great prompt
for the new Renaissance, because it's, from a model that we're talking about of, these factors that contributed to a Renaissance. Patronage, gifting was part of how the Renaissance was implemented. You need innovation and you need patronage. Those are two significant factors to propagate a new culture, which in result creates a Renaissance.
Absolutely.
Right? So that patronage is the people with the means need to be giving.
It's true.
They need to patron those who have the mimetic frequency to actually propagate the culture and set those new norms in place that is inviting then the collective to participate in it.
Yeah, well said.
That's the ripple of and this is what we're trying to do with benevolent culture. This is what we're trying to do is approach it as a cultural foundational model. It's like, what are the values? what are we contributing? What is the long game of the choices compounded that we're making every day, and why are we making those choices, and what's going to create the biggest ripple of impact and the greatest benevolent impact on the planet possible? And so I think there are, even though some people are in survival, that inherent human nature can shine through, but it is the people that have it need to see the opportunity that they can have to receive by giving is a beautiful, it's a signpost that I wasn't tracking, although I was tracking patronage.
Well, I saw, and I'll hand it to you, and I think we're going to close pretty soon here, is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yep.
It's actually the seven
Bingo.
It's actually the 7 chakras. Maslow took it from India, as pretty much everybody did, as we'll get into later. We're going to have a whole season on the Vedic Renaissance here. But, your basic needs, your second chakra, your needs for power and control of your environment. It goes up all the way into the top, which is self-actualization. And then later on in his life, a few years before he died, he's like, wait a second, I forgot the 7th chakra, self-realization. And he added that onto his wheel. I'm like, oh, thanks, Maslow. But I saw that, the Star of David, what happens when you invert the wheel, or invert the pyramid, right? So you have the pyramid this way, because once you've achieved all of your ego desires, satisfactions, needs, survival, self-actualization, self-realization, you realize you're the master of your dream, you've created abundance and wealth, you realize who you are. What is the only thing left to do? Give. Exactly. So at this point, the idea of the next Renaissance is that all of this work and medicine journeys and shamanic journeys and initiations and the consumption of the caterpillar myth, which maybe we can end with, I'd love you to be able to share that at the end here, gets to a place where our privilege of having reached that place and consumed enough resources over enough lifetime means that we can create a true circle, a true council, a true group of embodied, awakened masters who realize their interconnectedness, whose only job is to give back to a culture. And that's where I feel like this patronage, this, next conclave, so to speak, of beings to inhabit this emergent mythos and value system need to rise.
This is why I'm an optimist. And optimism is not naivete. If you go to the Latin, it means optimus, which means the best. It means you're aiming at the best outcome. It doesn't just mean everything's just great, love and light. That's one of the diseases, the mental diseases that the community we surround ourselves with has. Meanwhile, pessimism, which again, Latin pessimus, the worst, has become the vogue. So being a pessimist means you're a realist. Market's going to tank, everything's going to shit, politics. That's actually seen as an intellectual stance, which is also a sign, harkening back to Rome, of an empire in the 4th stage of decay, which unfortunately, the good old American empire is in that stage. And there's a lot of evidence, the writing's on the wall. It's so easy to be an optimist when you study evolution, which I love. This is what I was going to do my PhD in before I took the red pill.
Oh, cool.
Evolution thrives in situations of adaptive bottlenecks. So when a species gets into a tight spot, the dormant DNA, the dormant skills and gifts, the recontextualization of resources and adaptive traits comes to the fore. So the mutants, the downtrodden, the artists, the ones that were looked at like, how much do you make a year? Now become center stage in this evolutionary what's called a punctuated equilibrium burst. It's basically like you have a plateau where everything's kind of just business as usual, and we have a breakout or a breakdown, and they're happening simultaneously. Coronavirus has been a accelerant, a catalyst, which is just something that in the presence of speeds up change. And this is happening globally because blockchain and the blockchain ledger, which is a pure technology, and whatever Satoshi Nakamoto was or is as impactful as the printing press.
I agree.
Because now we have a way
innovation
to track information and keep track of it in a decentralized, open source, transparent way that's immutable, if done right, completely changes global supply chains, economics, the power of status and landowners and how they look at the model. Because all wealth is in the 1%'s hands, which is a mathematical fact. It's not a conspiracy theory. There's a group of corporations, families, and governments that are holding most of the cards. If even 1% of that 1% could be incentivized to be the giver and flip that hierarchy of needs and pave the way for others like them or their heirs, more likely, They don't want to be like mom and dad who just hoarded their wealth and were seen as kind of the Ebenezer Scrooge. They've sat with medicine. They've traveled a bit. Maybe they came to Bali and hung out with entrepreneurs. They see now that the path forward, and actually the cool thing to do, we need to make this stuff cool. We need to make it attractive to younger generations, is to be in this giving sum total positive net benevolence model. And when you combine that with other stats, like, billions of people are living on less than $1 a day, do not have access to clean water, which is astonishing in 2022 of a hyper, utopian world. And only 60% of the world has the internet right now. We just crossed like 63% recently. There's a whole bunch of people, billions, that aren't even online yet, which means they don't have YouTube University, they don't have Udemy, they don't have, like, the next generations of entrepreneurs will rise out of the third world, as we're already seeing with India being one of the top users of venture capital and blockchain. We're already seeing with Sub-Saharan Africa, we're seeing with Southeast Asia, we're seeing with South America. So all that considered, are we in an in-game crisis, like Avengers level, where there's like a Thanos level threat of AI and systemic genetic manipulation? Yes, but we out here.
But we out here.
The Avengers, the benevolent Avengers are out here, and we're teaming up.
Yeah.
We're teaming up.
We're teaming up.
As Gary would say, clip that.
Well, do you want to drop some bars? What do you
Give us the metamorphosis myth.
The metamorphosis myth.
Yeah.
The story of the imaginal cells, which as we observe the caterpillar in its environment, consuming like 40 times its body weight, looks very destructive. It's destroying its entire environment as it consumes. And then from deep within, there's an evolutionary impulse. That caterpillar is called to go inward and starts to create a cocoon. And that evolutionary impulse to create that cocoon is the cell of the butterfly, which holds the blueprint of the butterfly on a DNA level. And that's called the imaginal cell. And to the caterpillar, when that imaginal cell emerges from all the consumption and crossing that threshold, that cell starts to replicate and create little membranes of coherence as it fights off the caterpillar cell invasion, which thinks that the imaginal cell is a virus. Literally, the imaginal cells appear to the caterpillar DNA as an external threat, as an outside force, a virus. And so those imaginal cells start to form coherent membranes and replicate. And eventually, across this critical mass inside the cocoon, everything turns to liquid and then reforms, and out comes a new being with no memory of itself as a caterpillar, the ability with triple the lung size, and the ability to actually go into pollination. It like feeds the ecosystem as opposed to takes away from it. So it out comes a whole new being. And that analogy is one for our civilization, for the new Renaissance, that many of us are imaginal cells with the blueprint of the new civilization. And we are clustering and creating healthy cell membranes to, with the external powers that were. The powers that were, the game A, would view us as a threat to their system, but there's a natural emergent pattern from nature that we are not separate from, that's emerging, that's holding those systems. And so
what's beautiful is when the caterpillar cells attack the imaginal cells, they actually get converted into imaginal cells.
Yeah.
If they cross the membrane, that's how it reaches the 51%.
Yeah.
Because they try to attack it, and the imaginal cells convert them. It's like a positive
That's the
zombie
Aikido,
outbreak.
right?
It's
That's the
Aikido.
Aikido we were speaking to
Yeah.
earlier.
Yeah.
I love that part. I did not know that.
that's a key.
That
That's
is a
key
really
piece.
beautiful key.
Yeah,
Thank you
because
for that,
we don't create a new system by fighting the old one, right, Bucky?
Bucky.
We
brother.
do by creating something that creates the old one
Makes
it's
the old
obsolete.
obsolete.
Yeah,
We
it's
outmode
obsolete.
it by building
Yeah.
the new. That's just
From
Because
weaponry to
love
livingry.
does win. Like when people come into a true coherent field of love, where they're held by their brothers and sisters, where they're feeling seen and loved and respected for who they are, not what they can bring monetarily, there's such an opening of the heart and a yearning of the heart that is in every human being that I've ever encountered in my life. And I've encountered a lot of human beings. I've lived in every continent around this planet, and I've traveled my whole life. And most human beings are good. Most human beings want to have deep love and connection and purpose and meaning and belonging. And they want to see the best for their loved ones around them. And that gives me hope. That gives me inspiration that we now, as the caterpillars who have consumed a lot America, Canada, the West, we've been caterpillars. We have been hyper consumers. We're called consumers. We've out-consumed everybody. Well, now it's our moment to butterfly.
Yeah.
Well,
I think the pandemic was the
cocoon.
The cocoon.
Yeah, wow.
And
good metaphor. Interesting.
Many of us.
The virus was the virus.
Yeah, the virus was bioweapon. The evolutionary impulse now is alive. It's in the field, and sometimes we have to go through the disillusionment. We have to go through, oh wow, like these things that I thought were good for me, or these authorities that I've placed all this emphasis on was actually coming from this deep wound of codependency, and whatever. We have to pass through a disillusionment phase. So I think there's a lot of different stages of awakening that the collective is still going through, that maybe many people have passed through already, their version of it in their own life path. They lost a parent early, or they gone through a healing crisis and awakening. Whatever that shift in consciousness happens, for a lot of people, it was the pandemic. For a lot of people in the past, it was 9/11. Whatever it is, that pattern interruption that says, hey, impermanence is real. What you thought was working for you is not actually bringing you happiness, whatever that is. So the opportunity we have now is to actually self-organize around these deeper principles of awakening and set a precedence to cluster and propagate a benevolent culture.
This is the duty of the imaginal cells in the mythos, is to cluster.
Yes.
As soon as they wake up to themselves as an imaginal cell, oh, I'm holding a blueprint that all the cells around me just want to eat 40 times their body weight. I'm feeling something new. Yeah. The first impetus is to cluster.
Find the others.
That's how find the others. That's how you do it.
If you're listening to this right now and you're feeling this deep within your spirit, and you've been doing that deep inner work, and you feel the calling to cluster with us, reach out.
Hit us up.
Because we are here as emergent cells. Me, Luke, and Kevin are part of a larger coherent field that are building a network right now of systems change agents, of bards, of leaders, of those who want to participate in this next renaissance as we co-lead each other into this new world. So this is part one. We're going to sit around the same table, and we're going to do another part two, because there's many threads here I think we should definitely follow up on, maybe even a part three. It's been an honor to have you brothers here.
Love you guys.
Love you too. We'll see you all listeners soon.
Thanks for listening, family. The fastest way to accelerate the next renaissance is to share ideas that matter. If you found this to be valuable, please consider taking 15 seconds, pressing the follow button, and sharing this with somebody that you feel will benefit from it. If you think someone needs to be on this podcast with us, send us a DM and let us know. Until next cast.